We've talked a lot about the issue of abortion and how we got here. How is the pro-life movement set up to respond? That's the question. The goal certainly is abortion zero, right? That we have 0 abortions in Canada. And I know that, this side of the veil, right, in a broken world, abortion is always going to be with us, just like any other kind of sin is always going to be with us. But it doesn't have to be so prominent. It doesn't have to be legal. It doesn't have to be so openly and widely practiced, right? And so the goal is to work to end abortion. And so the pro-life movement is set up in response to this crisis in 3 different arms. I know most things don't have 3 arms, but this thing has 3 arms, so just bear with me. The first is the crisis arm of the movement, or the pastoral arm, you might think of it. Working to make abortion unnecessary, working to make abortion irrelevant. Here we have crisis pregnancy centers that provide the very needed care and supplies and support to pregnant mothers, and also resources and counseling and healing ministry, often Christian healing ministry, to post-abortive mothers and fathers for those who have experienced abortion, have had an abortion. And then the other arm is the political arm, working to make abortion illegal. So you've got organizations like We Need a Law, which lobbies politicians and promotes or kind of helps them to table legislation on abortion. And then you have organizations like Right Now that work to nominate and elect pro-life candidates so that you have people sitting in the House of Commons who can then vote on the pro-life laws that We Need a Law helps put forward. Okay, so that's how the political arm works. And then you have the educational arm of the movement. And this is where CCBR is. The mission here is to make abortion unthinkable, to change hearts and minds. Now, how do these arms relate to each other? And what's the importance of the educational arm? Well, we live in a country where the majority of people think that the majority of abortions are okay. And even the ones where they think, maybe they'd answer a poll and say, I don't think that abortion is okay, right? Late-term abortion, sex-selective abortion, those have majorities of people against them. But they're not high on people's voting priorities, right? And so we need a change of heart on abortion. We need to create more voters who will prioritize preborn children, not just on a poll, but in their vote, in the ballot box. And so creating grassroots supports for politicians that can point to their constituency and say, yeah, this is what the people want, right? And so the educational arm helps the political arm in that sense. And then the crisis arm, well, every year 100,000 women, instead of going to crisis pregnancy centers to get the care that they and their babies deserve, part of it is a marketing issue where, not everyone is aware of the local crisis pregnancy center and all the resources that they have. But also part of it is a heart issue because people very often want help out of a crisis pregnancy, not help through a crisis pregnancy and through birth and parenting and the like. And so what people need is a change of heart. We would like to create more people who are willing to go to that crisis pregnancy center and get the care that they and their baby deserve. And so that's the importance of the educational arm, supporting the movement, working to end abortion. Now, our strategy at CCBR is very different than most educational organizations. We are a street outreach organization that works to put boots on the ground to transform our culture because we realize that, 11% of people go to church or a synagogue or a temple. 89% of people don't go to a religious service on a weekly basis in Canada. That's how secular we are. And so we need to go door to door. We need to go to street corners and talk to them about abortion. We need to go to the university campuses and talk about abortion. And when we do that, we're doing what no one else does. We show people victims of abortion. Just like the abortion rights movement showed victims of women who died by abortion, we're showing victims of children who have died by abortion to promote their cause, to ground the conversation in the fact that abortion has a real victim, and that victim has a face. And we pair the visual exposure of injustice with compassionate and compelling conversations, which Jerome is going to teach you guys how to have in just a couple weeks. Conversations that are grounded in reality, in the reality of what abortion does, but conversations that, the ethos of them can be characterized as being compassionate, as being gentle, as being fair-minded, and very productive. Now, this strategy is not one that we came up with, but is the successful strategy of every single successful social reform movement of the last 250 years. Those movements were successful because they put the victims front and center in efforts to educate society. They were successful because victims change minds, ultimately. Moving very quickly through some of these social reform movements, you have William Wilberforce in the abolitionist movement to end the slave trade and then eventually slavery. They would take these depictions of slaves in chains, slaves on slave ships, images that might not be hard on our eyes today, but at the time, this image was described as leaving an instantaneous impression of horror upon everyone who saw it. These images were shared by the thousands throughout Great Britain and let the British people know that what was happening half a world away was an injustice. It put the victims on the map for the British people for the first time ever. And that led, in just the span of one lifetime, on William Wilberforce's deathbed, he received the news that slavery itself was banned throughout the British Empire. I can only imagine the joy that he must have felt, knowing that. Slavery and injustice that was at least as deeply rooted in those societies as abortion is in ours. The historian Adam Hochschild writes that this imagery was key to transforming British society and to driving out slavery. Moving into the 20th century in America, you have Louis Hine in his work with the National Child Labor Committee, working to reform the heinous child labor practices of their day. He would go into coal mines, he would go into factories, he would take pictures of America's youth who were losing their childhood and losing their lives in these workplaces, working dangerous conditions, working long hours, working in machinery in places that their bodies were not made to be in. And they would take these images and they would put them up at street fairs and they'd put them up at community events and show the American people, confront them with the reality of why their goods were so cheap, where their cheap goods were coming from, that were built on the backs of some of the weakest members of society and costing them life and limb in many cases. And that led to the passing of the 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act. Again, just in one lifetime, images were key to driving out that injustice. Moving a little bit forward to the civil rights movement, the leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, leaders in the civil rights movement, when they're working to end segregation, Jim Crow laws, they were sure to get the injustices documented, injustices that were perpetrated against civil rights workers. And then they would put those injustices in magazines, black magazines all across the country, and get them on television. I remember there was this one story where they had a photographer, the civil rights movement had a photographer at one of the marches, and the police were committing acts of brutality against civil rights marchers. And the photographer was stepping in to help somebody who was being brutalized. And MLK pulls him back and tells him, no, your job is to photograph what is going on here so we can tell the world. And that's what they did. And that led to the 1964 Civil Rights Act and legal equality for all black Americans. Again, images key to social reform. That's because images are, pictures 1,000 words. Pictures do for us what words can't, right? And sometimes you need to see something to believe it. Images are used today to transform culture as well, to drive social change, whether that be images raising awareness about domestic abuse, mothers against drunk driving, victims of the Ukraine war and other wars, and then also victims of acid attacks. Anytime you're trying to drive a social change, the reformers that win, the reformers that transform culture, use victim photography to do so. And when we started with our mission at CCBR, we just had this historical precedent. We knew that victim imagery worked for others, and they worked today and in the past. But do they work for us? Well, we have a lot of data now that shows that they do, that they transform the way people think and feel about abortion. In the study that we commissioned a few years back, polling Canadians before and after they saw abortion victim photography in some of our pamphlets, 67% of Canadians recorded feeling more negatively about abortion. And the same study found that the number of Canadians who identified as completely pro-life increases by 30%. So to give you an idea of the impact of this, okay, I don't know if you guys can see this very well on this screen, but this is I don't know if that's very helpful. But anyways, I've highlighted 67% of houses here to give you a visual representation. This is on Google Maps. If you were to go on Google Maps and look at a street, you would see all the houses in between, but then all the ones in red, that is the number of people feeling more negatively about abortion if someone were to drop, let's say, a couple hundred pamphlets off. You do about 100 pamphlets in an hour, and in that time, 67% of people, 67 homes would feel more negatively about abortion. Okay, isn't that an hour well spent? And like I mentioned, the number of people who identify as completely pro-life increases by 30%. So if polling shows maybe 10 out of 100 people being completely pro-life, if you then share this imagery with 100 people, then that number increases by 30%. You go from 10 to 13 people being completely pro-life in the span of 1 hour, just sharing these pamphlets in people's mailboxes. Never mind having a conversation with somebody about abortion. But we also track how impactful our conversations are as well. In our conversations, on a sample of over 11,000 conversations talking about abortion, we see that 28% of people become completely pro-life in the span of one conversation. 28%. Most people haven't seen somebody change their mind on abortion. We're very blessed to see this every single time that we go out to the streets. And another 20%, so about half of people becoming more or completely pro-life. And by completely pro-life, I mean they think abortion should never be allowed. Not just personally pro-life, but completely pro-life. And even in the about 50% where you don't see a change in them, quite often, we're moving the needle. We're leaving a pebble in someone's shoe. We're having a good conversation. We're giving them something to think about that they didn't think about before. Maybe they're saying something like, I'm not ready to agree with you. I'm still pro-choice. But thank you for the conversation. Or thank you for giving me something to think about. Or I need to go look into this more. You quite often get people saying that. Or you ask them a question and you can see that they don't have an answer. They know they don't have an answer. And so you have this pebble in their shoe for later on. So even the conversations that don't have a significant change, we know that many of those conversations are very fruitful. The majority of those conversations, I would say, are very fruitful. but seeing 28% of people completely change their mind on abortion to completely pro-life. I think that is absolutely fantastic, something to be really excited about. I want to share with you a testimony video of some of these conversations that we're having across the street, across the country.
While doing Choice Chain, I was holding an image of an 11-week-old aborted child. Two boys walked up to me and they said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "This is what an abortion looks like." I then asked them if they believed in human rights, and they said, "Of course we do." And after talking about human rights for a bit, they both agreed that an abortion is a human rights violation because it kills a child, and they walked away completely pro-life.
I was doing Choice Chain at the high school in Calgary, and in the span of a lunch hour, I literally spoke to 35 students who had never thought about the issue of abortion before, and by the end of my conversations with them, every single one of them realized that abortion was a human rights violation.
While doing Choice Chain in downtown Windsor, I spoke to a woman named Christine, who shared with me that she thought abortion was wrong in all cases except for sexual assault. And she then mentioned how she just left the courthouse where she was dealing with her own sexual assault case, and she wasn't sure if she was pregnant or not. So Christine wanted to know, what did I think about that? I told Christine how valuable her life is and how we as a society need to do more to care for women like her who have been through such a traumatizing experience. I then showed her how valuable the life of the preborn child was as well, and that they are deserving of their human rights. Christine smiled at me and said, "Wow, you really struck a chord in me." We shook hands and she went on her way.
Not knowing that Hannah had already spoke to her, I asked her again what she thought about abortion. While motioning across the street, she said, "Hannah changed my mind," and she went on her way.
While doing activism, I asked a woman walking by what she thought about abortion. She then pointed to a cute little boy in her stroller. She told me that she was going to get an abortion, but chose not to after seeing our signs and talking with us. Little Noah is alive today because his mother saw what abortion really does to preborn children.
I was recently doing activism in downtown Hamilton when a young woman approached me and said, "I saw you guys here last week and I was going to get an abortion, but after seeing the pictures of aborted children, I changed my mind. I'm keeping my child."
This strategy changes hearts and minds. But as you could see in that video, it does more than that. It saves lives, preborn babies' lives from abortion. I want to share with you guys an opportunity, something really exciting that we have going on in Manitoba here. Every year, CCBR runs our internship program. Hopefully you guys can see that. Yeah. Our internship program, we've been running it since about 2012 or so out in Calgary, and then a couple of years after that started an internship program in Toronto. And these are training programs where, you know, high school, university youth, or people who are in between jobs or want to discern a job in the pro-life movement, they go in this training program for 2 or 4 months in the summer and get a lot of training in the classroom on how to talk about abortion, weeks of training, and then go out on the streets every day to change hearts and minds and to save lives. We, for the first time, had an internship here in Manitoba last year. We're getting ready for our second internship. And so whether it's someone here or whether you guys know somebody, maybe a grandchild, maybe someone else in your community, someone from church here, who would be interested in joining our internship team, we're going to be taking applications until about May 15th, around that time. But the sooner that they can get their application in, they can just go to our website and sign up. That way, on the website, there's, you know, a big red Apply Now button on the internship webpage. And this is a job that people fundraise for. It's kind of like missionary work in that sense. They'd fundraise their salary, and it runs from July through August. They'd fundraise their salary, and then we would pay it to them. So they'd fundraise from family members, from friends, from their church, that kind of thing. And that enables us to have so many more interns if they bring their support teams with them to help fund this work. I want to share with you a short video that highlights our summer internship program that we'll be running here in Winnipeg.
Abortion happens 300 times a day in Canada. There's no one to protect these babies.
They are voiceless, and if you can recognize that, recognize the need to do something about it.
It takes a leap of courage, but once you do it, you get to see minds change right in front of you.
Every summer, the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform responds with our paid internships in Toronto and Calgary.
I wanted to get involved with the pro-life movement, and I saw that the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform was the most effective changing hearts and minds.
Hi there, what do you think about abortion?
Every day of CCBR's internships, young people go out into the street to communicate with members of the Canadian public.
Do you believe in human rights?
To change their minds, change their hearts, and save the lives of these children.
You will challenge the status quo of our nation using CCBR's outreach projects such as postcarding, door knocking, and conversational street outreach.
You'll get equipped with apologetics, strategy, tools to engage the culture and make a change in our country.
Is it okay? Not okay? I was just talking to 3 guys on the street, and we walked through how all human beings should get human rights. And by the end of the conversation, all 3 of them agreed that abortion was never okay.
You will grow in skills and character, gaining friendships and community.
There's a lot of things that make this experience worth it. It's the relationships and the friendships you get to make through it all.
You'll learn public speaking, you'll learn leadership skills.
Who do you think should get human rights?
We use abortion victim photography and effective and compassionate apologetics.
I've learned about why abortion victim photography is so effective. I've learned how to defend the pro-life position.
Our projects reach Canadians with the truth about abortion, and our polling data shows that 67% of these people think more negatively about abortion. You will see countless people change their minds on abortion, and you will see lives saved.
It's been a pretty intense summer in a really good way.
I learned how to communicate with literally everyone.
I think that all humans should get human rights.
Whether you're outgoing or this is a step outside your comfort zone, we need all kinds of people.
Make abortion unthinkable in Canada.
Be a defender of preborn children alongside us this summer.
Apply today at endtokilling.ca/internship. Space is limited.
So like I said, this opportunity, the deadline to apply is about May 15th. But I encourage, if you have someone that you know who would be a good fit for this, please encourage them to apply as soon as they can, so then they'll have the time to fundraise. We pair them with a fundraising coach that shows them how, gives them all the tools that they need to fundraise their support, and we successfully fundraise about 60 interns across this country every single year. Everyone who applies and puts in the effort ends up interning with us. And so that's an ask that I want to leave with you in a little bit more detail is that we start the internship with a road trip to Calgary, but that's an expense that CCBR covers. And we do training in the head office for 2 weeks, and then we come back to Winnipeg. And if someone is living out here, how are they gonna commute into the city? Maybe not every day, right? But what they could do is maybe find a relative or family member to spend the summer with during the week, and then on the weekends come home. And if that's not an option, I'd be willing to assist in trying to find a rental for that person in the city. Okay, but it is an opportunity that we do need to move on if we're going to have that person ready to intern by the beginning of July. So that's an ask that I want to leave with you to prayerfully consider who might be a good fit for that. I'd love to get somebody from Winkler-Morden area to come and intern with us. That would be fantastic. At this point, I want to open the floor to a Q&A. Josh and Jerome are going to assist me in this, keep me on track and in line. But yeah, if you have a question on the content that we covered today, please, ask it, and we'd love to answer. We'd love to answer all your questions about abortion, history of abortion in Canada, the work that our organization does, Yeah, things like that. Yeah, go ahead.
What's the biggest stated obstacle or resistance to changing to pro-life?
Yeah, the most common thing I would say that comes up is a circumstance, a difficult circumstance that a mother might go through. And so, people often bring up sexual assault or something as a reason to justify their support for abortion. It's really hard to say, though, what's the predominant thing. People also bring up bodily autonomy. It's my body, my choice. They bring that up quite often in conversation, and helping them to see the limits of choice. Choices are valuable. Autonomy is a valuable thing. But in a just society, aren't there limits to that choice, especially when it comes to committing violence against another human, right? My rights end where another human's rights begin. So those are some of the things that come up, yeah. And then also, related to that, people often have many of these things in their minds. Another thing is whether or not the child in the womb is a person, a human with human rights, worthy of any consideration, really, in our law. Yeah. Often all these things come together, yeah, I would say. Yeah. And so in your conversation, you have to kind of navigate through all that, yeah. Which is what we have Jerome here for, yeah, on the 25th, yeah. Good question, though. Mm-hmm. You guys must have wrote down something during that presentation, right? Yeah. Well.
Do the fathers not have any legal rights at all?
No, none. No legal rights. That was decided in a court case shortly after the Morgenthaler case. I think it was Tremblay versus Daigle or something like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, and just to comment a little bit about that, I don't think men should have a legal say to promote abortion, right? But the fact that men are cut out of the conversation entirely, I think it sends a bad message to men, right? It says, hey, if your lady maybe you have an unplanned pregnancy, well, it's not your problem, it's her problem. Right? And I think if we tell men to check out of that, it's no wonder that they check out after that child's born if the abortion doesn't take place. Right? We ask a man to unconditionally love a born child, a 2-year-old, shame him if he doesn't, but we tell him that he needs to turn that off when his child's in the womb. I don't think that makes any sense, and I think that really contributes to absentee dads and things like that. Yeah.
Another question. I hope they do not do any partial birth abortion?
It's not illegal in Canada. I don't know if that's a preferred method. We don't really have that kind of data in Canada. We have a lot of non-information. We don't have a lot of information about abortion methods in Canada. Yeah. Yeah. Often late-term abortions are done with a lethal injection that would stop the child's heart, and then they'd be born through induction. Partial birth abortion, yeah, it's hard to say if that happens in Canada. Yeah.
We do have, though, failed abortions, right, where the child is born and then left to die. We do have a few of those every year.
Yeah, at least 100 of those every year, where a child survives an attempted abortion, and then they're born. Stats Canada has this information, and they're born alive from their abortion procedure, but then they are there's no legal requirement to provide comfort or life-sustaining care to them, and these kids are very often 20 weeks. 21 weeks, 22 weeks, they're kind of on the borderline in terms of viability. But even comfort care, there's stories of kids left in buckets in rooms until they pass and that kind of thing.
I remember reading one
Yeah.
And yes, they injected the fetus, and then it was born, and the doctor left the room. And while she was cleaning up, that baby started crying. And she picked it up and wrapped it up and
Yeah.
walked with it, crying with it. This was in a magazine. I read that. I think it was the Carry-On.
Yeah.
Anyway, she said, I will never, ever assist an abortion again.
Yeah. That is really tragic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with all those kinds of tragic stories, you have the people who have those very real life experiences, right? And I think we saw from a lot of what Kyle's talking about, a lot of these injustices happening behind closed doors is a lot of people don't have those stories, right? And that's, I think, a part of it when it comes to the imagery, right? It's when people have a real life experience with abortion, it's much harder to rationalize away what it really is, who's really involved, how bad it really is, right? So those are very powerful stories.
How do you encourage a young potential mom who's been forcibly raped and gone through that whole process and she's pregnant? What words do you use to start with?
Yeah, that's a very, very difficult situation to be in, right? And I don't know if you're speaking from experience. So counseling a mother who is in crisis, you know, I'll preface by saying that's not my expertise, right? I'm talking to people who, it's more theoretical for them, right? 999 times out of 1,000, you're not talking to someone who's pregnant and in crisis. But that does happen, and how I would approach that, just knowing what I know about the issue and the more limited experience I have had in those situations. I have sat down with others who are considering abortion and have offered practical help to them. I think in a situation like that, you know, there's a lot that we could go into for that, right? There's a lot to unpack there. But I think depending where she's at, you know, talking about the sexual assault, right? Making sure she's getting counseling for that. Affirming her worth, right? Because that might be an issue after sexual assault. She's not the reason for the sexual assault, right? It's not her fault. So I think speaking into that, making sure she's connected with help. But then, you know, if she's considering abortion in that situation, I think you really want to build a connection with her and that child, help her to relate to that child and see that child as separate from the rapist, right? And that's how I would approach it, and offer practical help as well. I think when someone's in crisis, you can't just offer, well, you know, don't do abortion. I think you really need to come through, and they have to know that you're going to come through for helping them. I think that's really important, yeah. And so what Jerome's going to cover in a couple weeks is not, you know, those conversations in crisis, but the far more likely to happen conversations that you'll have with people at the coffee shop or here at church, or just talking to people, what they think about abortion when it comes up in the news and things like that. So they're kind of two related but separate conversations. Yeah. There's some overlap, but when someone's in crisis, I think you need to approach it in a bit of a different way, right? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Regarding the women that might be talking to you about abortion and have had an abortion.
Yeah.
That conversation is, anyway, what would you have to say about that? What is it like, and what do they need in your opinion?
Yeah. So we do talk to a fair number of people who've had abortions. That often comes up in the conversation. And we train people how to have that conversation. It's its own, 90-minute workshop that we train our interns, our volunteers in. And it builds on the principles that Jerome will be covering in a couple weeks. There's general things like we're wanting to show genuine love and trying to understand them and their situation and the factors that led to their choice. We're trying to display concrete expressions of love and being vulnerable to them, often saying something like, because you need to break down stereotypes, right? So that they're not defensive, because often there's the anger that comes with this conversation for someone who's post-abortive and maybe who's in denial about their abortion experience. So you kind of need to bring down that defensiveness and encourage them to be vulnerable and to, hey, we're going to have a good, healthy conversation about this, regardless of what you think about pro-lifers, right? Or what you've been told about them, how they're judgmental, how they're, they don't care about women, or they must hate someone who had an abortion, that kind of thing, right? You're going to break down those stereotypes. So making, real concrete expressions of genuine love, something like, if my mom told me that she had an abortion, I just want you to know, I wouldn't hate her, I wouldn't despise her, I would want to help her, I'd still love her. And if someone maybe yourself or someone has had an abortion, I just want you to know that, we wouldn't hate you or your friend either, and we would want the best for you. We'd want to help them, that kind of thing. And then when they share about their abortion experience, we're really trying to, to understand those factors, and then helping them, the factors that led to their abortion decision, and then we're really trying to help them see that abortion first is wrong, and then hopefully help them to see that even their own abortion was wrong, right? And once we can get them to that place, seeing that abortion is wrong, even their own abortion, then I think they're open to suggestions for maybe counseling, for for a spiritual conversation at that point, because really what they need is healing, right? And that's something only Christ can give, especially for something like abortion. And so that's kind of how the conversation would go. But we really need to break down those barriers first, and then build that trust. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that, but yeah.
Yeah, kind of adding on to what Kyle is saying, kind of from the past two questions on victims of sexual assault, on people who've had abortions, I think kind of in the way that, there's a training in a couple of weeks, and these conversations as well with people more directly tied to abortion. And we often think of it in terms of head apologetics and heart apologetics. That it's important to know how to rationally defend the reasons why killing these children is wrong, right? We need people understanding that there's a real victim involved, that it is really wrong to kill a valuable human. And there's also this heart issues that people may have tied to the issue, whether they've been involved in an abortion scenario in their own life or a friend's life, or someone's been traumatized. So that's what makes it all more important, like Kyle says, breaking down stereotypes, right? I'm showing that I'm caring about these people. I often tell people on the street, I give them an analogy of, my brother, and he hasn't done this, but just imagining that one day he went drinking and driving, and he went and he hurt somebody. And, the person I'm talking to knows I'm against abortion, and we're both against drinking and driving. I'll tell them, I would totally be against what they've done, but do you think I would stop loving my brother? No way, right? I would still will the good for him. I would still love him. So in the same way, I think it's important going into those conversations, showing that while we are against abortion, we're not wavering on that we are showing compassion to them, right? That we are expressing that to them, helping them, and kind of ministering to them in a heart apologetic as well as a head apologetic, because there can be barriers in both camps for people.
And then one thing, too, we know as Christians, right, that people who have committed sins that other people, society, has okayed, right, the possibility of repentance for them is prolonged, right? They're not able to repent because someone has said, it's okay, you didn't do anything wrong. And so oftentimes, we'll talk to people who have had abortions, and maybe they feel comfortable enough because we've developed common ground, we've communicated that we care, we want their good, right? For them and their children. They'll feel able to share with us. And very often it's like we're the first people that, that these mothers are sharing this with for the first time. And then there's a door open, right, for confession of sin, repentance, and then the gospel can be given and forgiveness of sin. So it's, yeah, it's just really remarkable to see how actually quickly something like that can happen, where a mother will just come up and, hey, I've had 2, 3 abortions, and she's just like, maybe she comes in and she's really frustrated with us, right, because of what we're doing. We communicate care, and then 20 minutes goes by, and we're praying for someone. And that's happened. It happens all the time because the Holy Spirit is evidently working in her life through this. So that's been encouraging too. Yeah.
Awesome. Good questions. Yeah.
What would you say to someone that had been sexually assaulted, went to the hospital, got checked out, they right away give them a morning after pill? What would you say to someone if they asked you about that first?
Like, essentially...
Whether they're pregnant or not, they don't know, right?
I see. So, if they're... The only reason for getting the morning after pill would be to end a child's life, like to prevent implantation, right? Or, and this kind of gets into the conversation about the pill, like because they're kind of closely related, right, in how they operate. So we can talk about them kind of together, I think. So as contraception, right, there's 2 functions that contraception does. And so when we're talking about the pill, right, so one is to prevent ovulation, right, hormonal contraception we're talking about. Prevents ovulation. If you don't have an egg, then there's nothing for the sperm to fertilize. So there's no baby, right? So that's contraception, right? And then the secondary function of the pill, of these hormonal contraceptives, is to thicken the mucus in the cervix to prevent sperm from getting to the egg, right? So even if a woman ovulates and there's an egg, if the sperm can't get there, there's no fertilization, there's no baby, right? So that's contraception too. The third function, which is very often, if someone's getting the morning after pill, they're probably a little bit behind the ball on some of this stuff, right, in terms of this process. But even with the pill, right, there's a third function, which is if the mother ovulates and if sperm gets to that egg and fertilizes, then as that child is then moving down the fallopian tube, it's becoming a blastocyst, it's growing. It's not yet implanted in the woman's uterus, but it is a living human being. And so these hormonal contraceptives, morning after pill, the pill, they can thin the lining in a mother's uterus, which would then prevent implantation. And then that child who is already alive, very young, very small, would then not be able to continue living because they wouldn't be able to be sustained in the mother's uterus, right? And so the pill, the morning after pill, these technologies, they can cause an early abortion. And I'm sure some of us know people who were conceived on the pill. So we're knowing people who got through all 3 mechanisms. And so it's very conceivable that many people don't make it through that 3rd mechanism, right? And so that's just something, that's one reason why I think as Christians, we need to think about the use of hormonal contraceptives because they can act as abortifacients. And that's information that most people don't know. So there's a lot of, ignorance about these devices out there. But this is information we can find on the internet. that third mechanism, preventing implantation, that's something that pharmaceutical companies, they admit to in their longer product monographs. They often don't put that in the product inserts in the boxes. So there definitely is a campaign to paper over that third mechanism, that abortifacient mechanism of hormonal contraceptives. And so I can understand why a lot of people don't know about that, but it's there nonetheless. Yeah, and then the tragedy of sexual assault, right? Like, as terrible as that is, you know, we would never kill a child conceived in sexual assault, right? And like a 2-year-old or something, they still have the same worth. And if a mother, as that toddler was growing up, if the mother thought they looked more and more like the rapist and that was causing emotional issues for her, we still wouldn't, you know, kill that child. And so, you know, humans have human rights regardless of the circumstances of their conception. And
I just know that is, because I know someone that it happened to.
Yeah,
and
that's terrible.
They were just given the morning after pill right away. Whether this person got pregnant or not, I don't know. She doesn't know.
Yeah, it's really hard to say. Yeah, it's just a device that can operate in that way. It's dangerous in that way. And like the campaign to cover this over is very thorough. They even redefine what conception means. Like in the medical field, conception means implantation now. So when you're like, oh, you know, it doesn't prevent conception. Well, yeah, but fertilization is when sperm and egg come together. It used to be what conception meant. Now conception means it's implanted. That's when the pregnancy begins. And you can see how they're playing this word game so that somebody isn't concerned about taking birth control, right? Yeah. You're trying to hoodwink people. Yeah. Go ahead.
Just a comment. I was at a conference years ago, and the speaker who, anyway, he informed us infanticide is legal in other countries. And it happens a lot. So as bad as it is here, post-abortion, murder, whatever.
Yeah.
And or post-birth abortion, sorry. And it can get worse. It's bad.
Yeah.
You've probably heard that, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't know if I know of countries where infanticide is legal. Yeah, practiced. Yeah, practiced. Yeah. Yeah, child abandonment. Yeah. Sorry?
Groaning protocol, is it? Or that's a little bit different, yeah. But
I'm not sure on that. Yeah. Do you know about that?
Sure. I think in the Netherlands, there is a protocol in place where
euthanasia.
Yeah, where euthanasia is allowable for children who have been born and who have various disabilities. But yeah, there's like a legal infanticide, and it's kind of marketed as a euthanasia type, you know, assistance in dying protocol. But yeah, in the Netherlands, it's been, I think, active for a few years already. And yeah, those kinds of procedures are probably going to creep their way into certain Western countries, like namely Canada, if we're not, if we're not careful. We need to keep doing our work. But yeah, that's troubling. Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, if you have a question that you'd like to ask us more in person, in private, feel free to do that as we're packing up and getting ready to close the night. But we've really appreciated everyone coming here. We really appreciated the church having us to come and give this talk, and we really look forward to the apologetics workshop, the conversation skills workshop that we're giving on the 25th. So we really look forward to that. So thank you, and God bless.